While my mother-in-law was happily shopping alongside my husband's mistress, I was canceling their credit cards one by one. She still knew nothing. She did not know that the palace she lived in belonged to me. She did not know that every column, every imported piece of furniture, and every luxury had been paid for from my account. My revenge was only just beginning. Before we continue, make your presence known with a subscription, a like, and a comment. If you have already done so, let us step into the beginning of this story. Also, please tell us what city you're watching from. It's important for us to know how far our stories reach. The delicate clink of a silver spoon against a porcelain plate was the only sound filling the grand dining room. Above the table, a massive crystal chandelier poured golden light onto the cold, gleaming surface of Italian marble. This was the stage where, night after night, the drama of that family unfolded. Victoria Sterling, the invisible director and never-acknowledged leading actress, stirred her vegetable soup without appetite. That evening she had prepared her husband's favorite dish, beef Wellington. It was a complex recipe that required more than 5 hours of preparation. Even so, Victoria had made it with care, hoping to see a smile of satisfaction on her husband's face. But Julian Thorne ate in silence. His eyes drifted far more often to the screen of his phone than to his wife sitting across from him. "This dish is quite good, Victoria," said Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, finally breaking the silence. Her tone was dry, sharp, full of invisible thorns. "It reminds me of the taste of canned chili from a cheap place near our old house. For something made by someone like you, it tastes surprisingly authentic." It was a compliment wrapped in an insult. Victoria was used to it. She barely curved her lips into a pale smile, one she had practiced for years in front of the mirror. "I am glad you like it, Mother." "Of course Mother likes anything her daughter-in-law makes," Julian chimed in, finally lifting his eyes from his phone. He winked at Victoria as if they were a team, as if they shared some kind of complicity that did not exist. But Victoria knew that his defense was hollow. It was not meant to protect her or preserve her dignity. It was simply Julian's way of ending uncomfortable conversations without taking sides. "Next time, try a recipe from the French cookbook I bought you," Mrs. Eleanor Thorne continued, placing her spoon on the plate with studied elegance. "Our family needs to get used to refined food, not these market dishes." Victoria said nothing. She simply looked at her husband, searching for even the smallest sign of support in his eyes. But all she found was his evasive gaze as he poured water into his glass with exaggerated care. In that very moment, Victoria felt like the loneliest person inside the palace she herself had built. That house, filled with tall columns and imported furniture, felt colder and emptier than the modest rented room where she had grown up. After dinner, as always, it was Victoria's task to clear everything away. The household staff only worked until the afternoon. It was a rule imposed by Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, supposedly to protect the family's privacy in the evenings. In reality, it was just another way to underline Victoria's position as the house's personal servant. As she washed the expensive dishes she would never have dared to use at her own wedding, Victoria caught her reflection in the dark kitchen window. She saw the tired face of a woman who had everything yet owned nothing. In the outside world, unknown to her husband and her mother-in-law, she was a queen. Victoria Sterling was the founder and chief executive officer of Zenith Corp, a technology company valued at billions of dollars. She had built it from nothing with sweat and sacrifice. Yet inside that house she deliberately hid her brilliance. She allowed Julian to appear as the successful head of the household, living off investments from a supposed paternal inheritance. It was a lie they had created together to spare Julian's ego. All that opulence, the house, the cars, the trips, even Mrs. Eleanor Thorne's unlimited credit card, came directly from Victoria's account. They lived comfortably on the fruits of her labor while trampling her pride day after day. That night, as she rinsed the soap from her hands, Victoria asked herself a question for the first time. How much longer was she supposed to keep this farce alive? The doubt did not arrive like a sudden storm. It came like a slow, persistent drizzle, soaking through clothes and seeping into the bones. It all began in her office. A minimalist space filled with cutting-edge technology, sharply contrasting with the rest of the house, which Julian and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne dismissed as nothing more than a strange corner for Victoria's hobbies. There, behind the heavy wooden door, Victoria shed her role as the submissive wife. In that world, she was known only by her initials, respected in business circles. In front of monitors filled with complex data and financial charts, she oversaw both the pulse of her company and her personal finances. That was when she noticed an anomaly. The credit card she had given Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, normally used only for monthly shopping at exclusive supermarkets or the occasional meeting in hotel cafes, was now showing a strange spending pattern. There was a charge at Maison Eclat for an amount equivalent to $5,000. Several transactions at Orchid Spa, where a single treatment cost $3,000. And the most frequent expense of all was dinner at Skyline 50, a fine dining restaurant at the top of a skyscraper that Victoria herself had never visited. At first, Victoria ignored it. She thought perhaps Mrs. Eleanor Thorne simply wanted to indulge herself. But the charges repeated almost every week, always on the same days when Julian claimed he had to work late on a new project or meet with an important out-of-town client. The suspicion began to thicken. Julian grew distant. His phone was always on silent and never left his side. He often stepped away to answer calls in a low voice. Some nights, when he came home late, Victoria noticed the scent of an unfamiliar feminine perfume on his shirt. It was not the strong, classic fragrance of her mother-in-law, but something sweet and modern. Whenever Victoria tried to ask, Julian always had an answer ready. "It must be a client's perfume, honey." The conference room was very small. "You know, I do not like talking about work at home, it gives me a headache." The breaking point came with a call from Rachel, her best friend since college. Rachel's voice sounded uncertain on the other end of the line. "Are you okay, Victoria?" "Of course, Rachel. Why do you ask?" Victoria replied, forcing her voice to sound cheerful. There was a pause. Rachel took a deep breath. "I do not want to interfere, but I saw Julian a few days ago in a department store. He was not alone." Victoria's heart began to pound harder. "He was probably with a client," she said, more to convince herself than anything else. "It did not look that way. And I think I also saw Mrs. Eleanor Thorne at the same restaurant, sitting with them, laughing. I was far away, so I am not completely sure." The call ended in an awkward silence. Victoria thanked her, but her mind was already spinning. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, Julian, and an unknown woman. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a terrible picture she barely dared to accept. The drizzle of doubt now felt like a heavy cloud, swollen with an approaching storm. 2 days later, the storm arrived through a short message on her phone. That afternoon, Victoria was on a video call with her team in Hong Kong. She spoke with confidence and clarity about the company's expansion strategy in Asia. On the screen, she was a sharp, brilliant executive. But when the call ended and silence returned to the office, the restless Victoria came back. Her phone vibrated on the desk with a notification from Rachel. Victoria's heart lurched. With slightly trembling hands, she picked up the phone and opened the message. It was short, direct, with no detours. "I am sorry, Victoria. I think you need to see this." Below the text was a photograph. Victoria's world seemed to come to a complete stop. The air caught in her throat and her breathing turned heavy and uneven. The image, apparently taken discreetly from a nearby table, showed a scene inside the cafe of a luxury boutique. Sitting very close together were 3 people Victoria knew all too well. Her husband, Julian Thorne, was gazing adoringly at a young woman seated beside him. There was no doubt about it, she was the mistress. The woman leaned shamelessly against his shoulder, tilting toward him with familiarity as she proudly showed him a shopping bag from Maison Eclat. But that was not what shattered Victoria completely. What broke her heart into pieces was the third person in the photograph. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, her mother-in-law. She was sitting across from them, smiling broadly, radiantly, sincerely. A smile Victoria had never received in all those years. And her hand, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne's hand, reached out tenderly to brush a lock of hair away from the mistress's cheek. It was a clearly maternal gesture. A sign of absolute acceptance. A silent act of approval. Almost a blessing. A deep cold ran through Victoria's body, a cold that sank into her bones. Colder than the marble floors of the house she herself had paid for. Julian's betrayal was painful enough. But seeing her mother-in-law, whom she had served for years, always ignored, always belittled, conspiring with her husband's mistress and worse still treating her with affection, felt like being stabbed from the front and the back at the same time. With numb eyes, Victoria zoomed in on the image, forcing herself to examine every detail. The bag the mistress was holding was from Maison Eclat. The table was covered with elegant desserts from La Pâtisserie. Every strange charge on the credit card now had a face. The satisfied face of the mistress. The happy, proud face of Mrs. Eleanor Thorne. They were celebrating with her money. Celebrating their betrayal behind her back. Suddenly, the glass of water next to the computer fell to the floor. The sound of shattering crystal filled the office. The glass broke into pieces just like her heart. But Victoria did not cry. The tears seemed to have frozen before they could fall. Inside her there was only a deep, hollow silence. And that emptiness slowly began to fill with a cold, controlled, yet burning anger. She stared at her pale face reflected in the dark screen of the phone. The woman looking back at her seemed fragile, exhausted, defeated. Yet there was something new in her eyes. Something that had just been born. Something hard, sharp, and relentless. That farce had reached its final act. Victoria remained motionless in the chair for nearly an hour. She sat in silence, surrounded by shards of broken glass, letting the stillness of the office absorb everything boiling inside her. The pain, the shock, and the disappointment slowly settled. They were replaced by an unsettling calm. A terrifying calm. The calm that comes before a catastrophe. Finally she stood up. She walked across the glass without reacting, as if she could not feel it. Her steps carried her to the large window overlooking the perfectly manicured backyard. A garden she had designed with care and paid for over the years, yet had never been able to enjoy in peace. For a long time she had believed her patience was a virtue. She thought that if she endured, if she tried hard enough, one day she would be accepted. She believed that by hiding her power she could maintain harmony at home and protect her husband's ego. How naive she had been. Her patience was taken for weakness. Her dedication was treated as obligation. Her sacrifice was taken for granted. Julian and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne had taken everything from her. Her time. Her energy. Her money. And now her dignity. They had let her build that palace only to turn her into a servant inside it. Meanwhile, they brought in a stranger and placed her on the throne. "It is over," Victoria whispered to her reflection in the glass. Her voice was hoarse but steady. She returned to the desk. With a decisive movement, she turned the monitors back on. Stock charts appeared, financial reports, urgent emails from executives. Everything looked different now. This was no longer just work. It was her kingdom. Her source of power. Everything she had built with blood and sweat. She would not allow the parasites in her life to trample what belonged to her. The patient woman who cooked beef Wellington for 5 hours had died that afternoon. What remained was Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer of Zenith Corp., a strategist known for her cold, calculating mind. The long slumber as a submissive wife was over. The Queen had awakened. Victoria picked up the phone and dialed her personal assistant's number. "Miss Hopkins, good afternoon." "Good afternoon, Mrs. Sterling. How may I help you?" "I need several things. First, prepare a complete report of all my personal assets, including properties, vehicles, and bank accounts. Clearly separate jointly owned assets from those that are exclusively in my name and were acquired before the marriage." "Understood, Mrs. Sterling." Second, contact our legal team immediately. Tell them to prepare a draft of the divorce filing and the division of assets. Attach as initial information all the assets mentioned in the first point. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. The surprise was unmistakable. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling. I will take care of it immediately. And one more thing," Victoria added, her voice as cold as ice. "From now on, inform me in real time of all expenses made with the additional credit cards issued in the names of Julian Thorne and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne." "Understood, Mrs. Sterling." After hanging up, Victoria opened a desk drawer. She took out a small leather-bound notebook. On the first page she wrote in firm, decisive handwriting, "Operation, take everything back." A plan began to take shape in her mind. It was not impulsive or emotional revenge. It was a cold, calculated strategy born of the business world. The goal was clear: strip them of all the power and luxury that had made them arrogant and force them to face reality. The first phase of the plan began the following morning. Victoria deliberately woke earlier, put on her best tailored suit and left the house. Before Julian and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne woke up, she had breakfast in her office as Chief Executive Officer, on the 50th floor, overlooking all of Chicago. From that height, the view reminded her how vast her world was and how small her domestic problems truly were. At exactly 9 in the morning she called her private banking manager. "Mr. Blackwell, good morning. This is Victoria Sterling." "Mrs. Sterling, it is an honor to receive your call. How may I assist you?" "I need you to freeze immediately all additional credit and debit cards linked to my accounts, including those issued in the names of Mr. Julian Thorne and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne?" he asked to confirm. "All of them," Victoria replied. "List the reason as security concerns. Say suspicious activity has been detected." "Understood." Within 5 minutes, all cards will be inoperative. Victoria ended the call with a sense of cold, controlled satisfaction. The first strike had been executed. On the other side of the city, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne and her son's mistress, Bella, were at the peak of their arrogance. After a treatment at a beauty salon, they decided to have lunch at the restaurant of a 5-star hotel. Bella flirtatiously pointed at the lobster and the most expensive champagne on the menu. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, feeling generous and powerful with a wallet that was not hers, smiled and nodded. "You deserve the best, dear. Our future daughter-in-law has to look perfect." When they finished even dessert and the bill arrived, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne handed over her black card with an air of superiority. Minutes later, the waiter returned with a tense expression. "I am sorry, ma'am. The card has been declined." Mrs. Eleanor Thorne's face flushed instantly. "What do you mean declined? Try again. The signal must be bad." The waiter tried once more. The result was the same. "It is still not working, ma'am." Bella began to show clear signs of impatience. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne clicked her tongue irritably and pulled another card from her purse, the platinum one. It was declined as well. Panic began to take hold. She then tried her debit card. The result did not change. Murmurs from nearby tables began to rise. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne's face burned. Shame, anger, and confusion blended into a single suffocating emotion. She immediately pulled out her phone and dialed Victoria's number. In her office, Victoria Sterling saw her mother-in-law's name flashing on the screen. She let it ring a couple of times before answering in a slightly drowsy voice. "Yes, Mother." "Victoria, what did you do to my cards? Why are all of them being declined?" Mrs. Eleanor Thorne's shrill voice rang so loudly that there was no need for speakerphone. Victoria pulled the phone away from her ear for a moment. "Oh, they were declined?" she asked, feigning surprise. "Perhaps it is a banking system error, or maybe the security code was entered incorrectly. Try again later. Do not lie to me. This is your doing. Reactivate them right now." "I am sorry," Victoria replied calmly. "I am in the middle of a meeting and cannot be interrupted." Without waiting for a response, she hung up. She looked at the phone screen and then turned it off. Across the city, she could imagine her mother-in-law's panic and fury. She could also picture Bella's irritated face, her plans for a day of luxury completely ruined. A small, cold smile, the first genuine smile she had worn in a long time, curved Victoria's lips. The game had just begun, and this time she held all the cards. The front door of the imposing house burst open, shattering the nighttime silence. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne stormed in like a tempest, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. Behind her came Bella, her brow furrowed, her expression heavy with annoyance. The humiliation at the restaurant had been impossible to forget. After all the cards were declined, Bella had been forced to pay with her own debit card. an unexpected expense that kept her complaining throughout the taxi ride. Victoria was waiting for them in the living room. She sat calmly in a single armchair, holding a cup of hot Earl Grey tea as if she were awaiting honored guests. The sight only fueled Mrs. Eleanor Thorne's fury. "Victoria Sterling," she shouted. "How dare you humiliate me in public? Who do you think you are?" Mrs. Eleanor Thorne's voice echoed through the high-ceilinged room. Victoria took a slow sip of her tea before setting the cup down on the table. Then she looked up. Her eyes were cold, unfamiliar, eyes Mrs. Eleanor Thorne had never seen before. "I am simply sitting in my own home, Mother," she replied calmly. "You are the one who burst in shouting at this hour. Who is being rude here?" Mrs. Eleanor Thorne was left speechless. The calm, razor-sharp response stunned her into silence for a few seconds. Until that moment, Victoria had always been the daughter-in-law who lowered her head and apologized for everything. But the woman standing before her now was different. Sensing the hostile atmosphere, Bella decided to step in, using a falsely sweet, syrupy tone. "Ma'am, please calm down. I am sure Victoria did not do it on purpose, right? Next time, just do not forget to pay the credit card bills. It was a serious mistake." Victoria's eyes locked onto Bella. Her gaze was as sharp as a scalpel. "First, I have never forgotten to pay a single bill. Second, I do not recall inviting you into my home. And third," she paused, letting every word carry its weight, "this is a matter between my mother-in-law and me. A stranger has no reason to interfere." Bella's face went pale instantly. The status of future daughter-in-law that Mrs. Eleanor Thorne had boasted about so proudly seemed to dissolve under Victoria's stare. Desperate, Bella looked toward Julian Thorne, who had just come down the stairs after hearing the commotion. "A stranger," Mrs. Eleanor Thorne repeated, finally finding her voice again. "She is Julian's future wife and my future daughter-in-law. You are the one who will soon be a stranger here. You are nothing more than a useless wife who cannot even manage this household's finances." Victoria curved her lips into a faint smile, a smile that never reached her eyes. "The household's finances?" she echoed. "Mother, do you really want to talk about that? Because as far as I know, the people who have never contributed a single cent to this household's finances are always the ones who demand the most and shout the loudest." The words struck with surgical precision, aimed at both Mrs. Eleanor Thorne and Julian. Julian, who had remained silent until then, felt compelled to defend his mother and his mistress. But before he could open his mouth, Victoria was already standing. "I am tired. I am going to rest," she said with finality. She walked past the three of them, still frozen by the impact, and went up the stairs to her bedroom. She did not look back even once. Next morning, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, impeccably groomed and dressed, prepared to leave for her social engagement. She waited impatiently at the entrance. Her personal driver, Arthur, did not arrive. After several unanswered calls, she finally contacted the chauffeur service company. The response was brief and strictly professional. "We are sorry, ma'am. The service contract for your address is currently under review at the request of our primary client. Service is suspended until further notice." Primary client. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne frowned, confused. Reluctantly and muttering under her breath, she had no choice but to order a taxi. For her, it was a deeply humiliating experience. Meanwhile, Julian was trying to transfer money to Bella, who would not stop complaining and demanding compensation for the restaurant incident. The notification on his phone screen made his blood run cold. Insufficient funds. He checked the account in desperation. Victoria's monthly transfer, the one that should have arrived on the first day of the month, was nowhere to be seen. His account was practically empty. Panic took hold of him. He called Victoria, but the call went straight to voicemail. The chaos in the house intensified. The head housekeeper approached Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, her face tense with concern. "Ma'am, our salaries have not been deposited yet. Normally they would already be available by this time. Also, the pantry inventory is almost depleted. The online grocery delivery service has also been suspended due to non-payment." Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, who had never bothered to think about such details she considered trivial, could only respond dismissively. Then use the cash kept in the house. There is no cash left, ma'am, the housekeeper replied. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne was left speechless. The house, which had always felt cool and comfortable, now began to feel stifling. The premium cable television with hundreds of international channels suddenly stopped working. The internet connection, once lightning fast, became painfully slow, like an outdated service from years ago. The comforts they had taken for granted as a right were being cut off one by one without warning. Victoria moved through her own home like a ghost. She left for work before dawn and returned late when everyone else was already asleep. She deliberately avoided any confrontation. She let them simmer in their own panic, feeling how the flow of money that had always run freely was now reduced to a drip, until it dried up completely. Their luxury had been nothing but an illusion. An illusion that could be switched off as easily as flipping a switch. And now that switch was in her hand. In her rented apartment, Bella was beginning to grow restless. Her handsome, supposedly wealthy prince, Julian, now visited her more often with a furrowed brow than with shopping bags. Promises of dinners at the newest restaurants, a trip to St. Bart's, a limited edition watch, all of it had evaporated. Love, what is going on with you lately? Bella asked, massaging his temples. They had just finished dinner, not at a luxury restaurant but takeout food Julian had picked up on the way. There are some problems at home. What kind of problems? Nothing serious, just that Victoria is acting a bit strange, Julian said, trying to dodge the subject. Strange enough that my monthly allowance still has not arrived? Bella snapped, her tone sharpening. And where is your car? Why have you been taking taxis everywhere lately? What am I supposed to tell my friends? That I am dating a man who does not even have a car? Julian let out a deep sigh. The car is in the shop, and there has been an issue with the cards. That is why I could not make the transfer. Just be a little patient. Patient? I have already been patient enough, Julian. I turned down plenty of other men with money for you. You promised you would marry me and give me a better life than that dull wife of yours. And now what is this? Yesterday I even had to pay the restaurant bill myself, she exploded. Her sweet facade crumbled. The relationship, built on luxury and lies, was beginning to show its first cracks. Bella was not with Julian for love, but for the lifestyle he supposedly could provide. When that lifestyle was threatened, her loyalty began to waver as well. Listen, this is temporary. Soon everything will go back to normal, Julian tried. Bella pushed him away. I do not want promises. I want proof. Next week is my birthday. Buy me that bag we saw at Maison Eclat. If you buy it, I will believe everything is fine. She did not say it outright, but the threat hung clearly in the air. Julian sank onto the couch, drained. That bag cost thousands of dollars. Even under normal circumstances, it was money he would have had to ask Victoria for explicitly. Now, with his account cobwebbed and empty, Bella's demands sounded like a sentence. He was trapped. On one side, his wife, transformed into a cold figure controlling the flow of his life. On the other, his mistress, already showing her claws the moment the money stopped flowing. The foolish prince finally understood that his perfect world was crumbling. A single week of deprivation was enough to push Mrs. Eleanor Thorne and Julian to their limit. They could no longer endure it. That night, they deliberately waited for Victoria to return and intercepted her in the living room. The lights were turned on harshly, creating the atmosphere of an interrogation. We need to talk, Victoria, Julian said, trying to sound authoritative, though his face showed exhaustion and frustration. Victoria set her briefcase down and looked at them both calmly. Go ahead. What exactly do you want? You are torturing us. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne burst out, unable to restrain herself. You are cutting off every comfort, humiliating us, forcing us to live like beggars. After all the kindness we have shown you, this is how you repay us. Kindness. Victoria almost laughed. What kindness was she talking about? The daily insults? Or blessing her son's affair? This has gone too far, Julian continued. You are my wife. Your duty is to serve your husband and his family, not to act on your own like this. If you cannot be a proper wife, then maybe we should. Then maybe you should what, Julian? Victoria cut him off, her voice sharp. Get divorced? Is that what you want? The question, so direct, shocked both Julian and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne. They had only wanted to scare her, to pressure her. They were not ready for such an extreme consequence. They knew that without Victoria they were nothing. Julian, she does not respect you anymore. She is trying to destroy your home, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne shouted, attempting to manipulate the situation. You are ungrateful, Victoria. We took you into this prestigious family. You came from an ordinary background and we gave you a life of luxury, and now you have turned into a troublemaker. Enough. Victoria was tired of these invented stories. She said nothing. With a slow, perfectly controlled movement, she opened her briefcase, took out a brown envelope and placed it on the coffee table right between them. What is this? Julian asked warily. Open it, Victoria replied. With trembling hands, Julian opened the envelope and pulled out its contents. It was a glossy photograph, letter-sized. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne leaned in to look as well. Within seconds, all the anger and arrogance drained from their faces, replaced by a horrifying pallor. The image showed with absolute clarity the scene inside the cafe of the luxury boutique. Julian gazing devotedly at Bella, leaning coquettishly against his shoulder. And Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, smiling happily as she tenderly adjusted Bella's hair. The irrefutable proof of a triple betrayal. A suffocating silence filled the room. The ticking of the wall clock echoed like a hammer striking again and again. Finally Victoria spoke. Her voice was low and steady, trembling not with tears, but with anger held back for far too long. Thank you. Thank you for what exactly, Mother? She continued, fixing her gaze directly on Mrs. Eleanor Thorne. For the kindness of blessing my husband's affair with my own money? Or for the life of luxury you enjoyed alongside my husband's mistress while I worked myself to exhaustion to pay for everything? Then she turned to Julian. And you, Julian, were just talking about a wife's duty. Tell me, is it a husband's duty to betray, to lie, and to live like a parasite off his wife's work? There was no answer. Both of them remained frozen, exposed by the truth, caught in the act. The photograph on the table became a silent judge, delivering its verdict without uttering a single word. The real storm was only beginning, and for the first time, they understood that they had nowhere left to hide. The silence that followed Victoria's words weighed heavier than any scream. The photograph became the center of the room, drawing every gaze, stealing the air. Julian looked at the photo, then at Victoria, then back at the photo again. His face was a clear reflection of confusion and guilt. He had no excuses. But Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, who had lived for decades shielded by a mask of arrogance, was not ready to surrender so easily. To her, admitting a mistake had always been the greatest form of weakness. Her pale face flushed again, not with shame but with desperate anger searching for an outlet. This is a setup, she hissed, pointing at the photograph with a trembling finger. It is a manipulated image. You did this on purpose to get rid of us and keep all of my son's fortune for yourself. Victoria looked at her without blinking. My son's fortune, Mother? She repeated calmly. What fortune are you talking about? Mrs. Eleanor Thorne made a sweeping gesture, encompassing the magnificent living room. Everything in this house belongs to Julian. You are only living here on loan. You should be grateful we even let you stay. And now you dare to stage this cheap drama. That threat was her final, fatal mistake. It was the weapon she had always used to intimidate Victoria. But that night the weapon turned against her. Very well, Victoria said with an unsettling calm, as if speaking to a difficult client. If you insist that I am merely living here on loan and that this house belongs to your son, then there is nothing more to discuss. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne felt she had won. I am glad you finally know your place, she said with satisfaction. Now pack your things and get out of my son's house. Out. Julian looked startled by how quickly the situation had escalated. Mother. He tried to intervene. But Mrs. Eleanor Thorne's scorching glare silenced him instantly. Victoria did not move an inch. She simply looked at her mother-in-law with an unreadable expression, a mixture of pity and disgust. I will leave gladly, Victoria said and smiled. But the ones who will be packing are the two of you. She bent down, opened the briefcase she had left on the floor and pulled out a thick blue plastic folder. She opened it and placed its contents on the table, right next to the photograph of betrayal. There were several official documents inside, bearing seals, signatures and the letterhead of the property registry. The document placed on top stood out unmistakably: the deed to the land and the building they were standing in at that very moment. "Read it," Victoria said. "Read carefully the name of the sole owner listed there." With unsteady hands, Julian took the document. His eyes widened as he read the name printed in the owner's section. It was not his name. Not his father's either. There was no shared ownership. Only one name appeared: Victoria Strolling. Below it was the date of purchase: 2 years before their marriage. The house had been bought outright. The document slipped from Julian's limp fingers. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne lunged for it and read it with growing panic. He checked it once, twice, 3 times. The truth struck her so hard that she staggered back and collapsed onto the sofa. Her face, moments earlier flushed with anger, was now pale as a corpse. The entire story she had told herself for years crumbled in an instant. She was not the grand lady of her son's house. She was merely a tenant. A parasite living off the generosity of the daughter-in-law she had despised. "This house is mine," Victoria repeated, her voice clear and authoritative in the silence. "The cars in the garage are company assets. I paid for this furniture. Even the plate you used for dinner last night was bought with my money." She paused, letting the truth sink into their bones. "So I will ask again, Mother. If someone has to leave this house, who should it be?" 2 days passed in a suffocating atmosphere of Cold War. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne locked herself in her room, too ashamed to show her face. Julian wandered through the house like a caged animal, confused, furious, desperate. Every attempt to reach Victoria by phone failed. She seemed to have vanished physically, yet her presence was felt in every corner through silence and severed services. On the 3rd day, a message arrived on Julian's phone. It was brief, direct, emotionless: "Tomorrow at 10 in the morning. At this address. To finish everything. Come alone." Below it was an address in the heart of Chicago's financial district, on the Magnificent Mile. An imposing skyscraper he had passed many times but never entered. A spark of hope ignited in his mind. Maybe Victoria wanted to negotiate. Maybe he could still get something, at least access to an emergency fund. With that thought, he decided to go. The next morning, using the little money left in his wallet, he took a taxi to the indicated address. When he arrived in front of Zenith Tower, he froze. This was not a small office. It was the headquarters of a major corporation. Hesitant, he entered the lobby. The space was imposing. Polished black granite floors reflected the light like a mirror. Seeing him approach, the receptionist stood immediately and smiled with professional courtesy. "Good morning, sir. How may I help you?" "I have an appointment with Ms. Victoria Strolling," Julian replied, his voice edged with nerves. The receptionist's smile widened. "Ah, Mr. Thorne, of course. The president is expecting you. Please come with me." "President. Chief Executive Officer." Julian's heart began to pound. He followed her to a private executive elevator that took them straight to the 50th floor. When the doors opened, a young woman with a polished, professional appearance was waiting. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne. I am Miss Hopkins, the president's personal assistant. This way, please. The president is waiting for you in her office." Julian walked down a silent corridor covered in thick carpeting. Every employee he passed stopped and nodded respectfully. "Good morning." Everyone seemed to know exactly who she was. Miss Hopkins opened a massive solid wood door at the end of the hallway. Beyond it lay an office so vast it seemed larger than the entire ground floor of the house. Glass walls offered a 360-degree view over Chicago. At the center, behind an enormous mahogany desk, sat a woman. It was Victoria, and yet it was not. She wore a perfectly tailored dark blue suit. Her hair was pulled back with flawless precision. Her presence radiated power and absolute confidence. This was not the Victoria who cooked beef Wellington in the kitchen. Not the Victoria who lowered her head when she was insulted. This was a queen on her throne. "Welcome to Zenith Corp, Mr. Thorne," Victoria said. Her voice was calm, yet it filled the room. "Or, to be more precise, welcome to my world." Julian stood there, mouth slightly open. The plaque on the desk confirmed everything. Victoria Sterling, President and Chief Executive Officer. This company is yours?" he stammered. "Yes. It is mine. I founded it 8 years ago, starting in a small garage," Victoria replied as casually as if discussing the weather. Then she pressed the intercom button. "Ms. Hopkins, please bring the financial report for Mr. Thorne." Moments later, Ms. Hopkins entered and placed a folder in front of Julian. "Open it," Victoria ordered. With trembling hands, Julian opened it. Inside were the details of every monthly deposit he had received. They were not investment returns as he had always told himself. They were listed as a company expense line, coded as Executive Family Allowance. The next page contained a complete breakdown of all charges on his credit card and his mother's. Every single one paid in full by Zenith Corp. "Everything you have had, everything you have enjoyed, everything you used to support your mistress," Victoria continued. Her tone held no emotion. "It was my allowance. A benefit I granted you because of your status as my husband." She looked straight into his eyes, now filled with terror, as if he were an underperforming employee. "That allowance, as of today, is officially revoked." Julian collapsed into the chair across from her. His invisible crown had turned to dust. The foolish prince finally understood that he was nothing, just a name on an allowance list, and now that name had been erased. Julian's defeat at Zenith Tower was psychological, but Victoria knew that for people like him and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, the most devastating blow was the physical, public loss of their status symbols. 2 days after that meeting, the red European sports car Julian loved to show off was parked in front of the house. He was getting ready to leave to do something deeply humiliating: ask his friends for money. Just as he was about to open the door, 2 large tow trucks pulled up in front of the entrance, blocking the driveway. Several broad-shouldered men stepped out, wearing uniforms marked CN Logistics. The team leader, polite but firm, approached with an order in his hand. "Good morning. We are from the Asset Management Department of Zenith Corp," he said, showing the document. "We are here to retrieve 2 vehicles with the license plate numbers listed here, as they are company property." One was Julian's sports car. The other was the luxury SUV Mrs. Eleanor Thorne used for her social engagements. "What are you doing?" "That is my car," Julian protested. "According to our records, this vehicle is registered as a company car for executive use under Zenith Corporation." "It is not personal property, sir," the employee replied calmly, signaling his team to begin the operation. Inside the house, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne heard the commotion and rushed out. Her eyes widened as she saw her car being prepared for towing. "What are you doing to my car? Do you know who I am?" she screamed hysterically. Neighbors began stepping outside to watch the drama unfolding in front of the palace. For Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, who had always guarded her image as a high society lady, it was a nightmare. "We are simply following the instructions of the legitimate owner, ma'am," the employee replied, unfazed by her fury. Julian and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne could do nothing. They stood there, stunned, watching as both luxury cars, their symbols of pride, were loaded up and driven away. They were now stranded in their palace without their golden carriages. The humiliation in front of dozens of curious eyes hurt more than the loss of money itself. Victoria had not only taken away their luxury, she had stripped them of their pride and the social mask they had worn for so long. For Julian, losing the car was a massive blow, but the deadliest strike came from an unexpected place: Bella. There were 2 days left until Bella's birthday, and Julian was in the worst position of his life. No money, no car, no power. Desperate, he sold the only luxury watch he still owned, a gift Victoria had given him on an anniversary years ago. With that money, he bought a handbag from a local brand, perfectly decent, but nowhere near the level of maison éclat that Bella demanded. He showed up at Bella's apartment with the gift box and a bouquet of flowers. Her face, which had initially smiled, soured the moment she saw what was inside. "What is this?" she asked coldly. It is, it is a gift for you. Happy birthday, love, Julian replied nervously. Bella scoffed. A gift? You call this a gift? My grocery bag costs more than this. Bella, please try to understand. I am going through a difficult time. I do not care about your problems, she cut him off. Her anger exploded. She threw the box back at him. I am sick of your excuses. You are a loser. A foolish prince with nothing. Did you really think I would stay with you now that you are a beggar? You are nothing but a parasite living off your wife, Julian. And now that your wife turned off the tap, you are nothing. Each of Bella's words was a dagger driving deeper into Julian's already shattered ego. I already found a replacement, she continued with a cruel smile. A real man. Not a mommy's boy like you. At that moment, a luxury car horn sounded below. Bella grabbed her bag, an authentic Maison Eclat handbag, and slung it proudly over her shoulder. Where did you get that bag? Julian asked hoarsely. From Mr. Kensington. Next week he is taking me to New York to celebrate my birthday, she replied indifferently. She brushed past Julian on purpose, bumped his shoulder and opened the door. Oh, and one more thing. The rent on this apartment is due tomorrow. Congratulations on being homeless. Bella slammed the door in his face. Through the window, Julian watched as Bella went downstairs and climbed into a Bentley. Behind the wheel was an older, elegant, unmistakably wealthy man, Mr. Kensington. They drove off laughing, leaving Julian alone in the silent hallway of the building, broken and completely alone for the first time in his life. After Bella abandoned him, Julian staggered back home. He found his mother sitting in the living room, swallowed by darkness. The electricity had been cut off. They had not paid the bill, or rather they could no longer pay it. Only a weak emergency light flickered, revealing dust beginning to settle on the expensive furniture. They sat there in miserable silence. Two nobles, cast out from their throne. Suddenly the front door opened. Victoria stepped inside. Her silhouette was sharply outlined against the light from outside. She did not light candles or lamps. She simply stood in the doorway, looking at the two shrunken figures in the darkness. I am here to make you one final offer, Victoria said. Her voice was cold, formal, devoid of emotion. Julian and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne lifted their heads. You have two options, she continued. First, you leave this house tonight. You may take your clothes but leave everything else behind. I will not press charges for anything, and you will be free to go wherever you wish, without money, without a destination, without a place to live. That option was, in practice, the same as ending up on the street. The second option, Victoria said, extending her hand. In her palm lay a simple key. I rented a small apartment for you. 3 months of rent have already been paid. Inside there is basic furniture and a little money on the table so you can eat for 1 week. He paused, not softening the blow. After that you will have to find a way to survive on your own. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne stared at the key with horror in her eyes. A rented apartment, after decades of luxury, was an unimaginable humiliation. But Julian saw it differently. After being humiliated by Bella and abandoned without a single dollar, Victoria's offer felt like a lifeline in the middle of the ocean. It was humiliating, yes, but it was also a chance to survive. With heavy steps passing by his mother, still frozen by the shock, Julian walked toward Victoria. He did not dare look her in the eyes. He simply lowered his head and took the key from her palm. It felt heavier than a bar of gold. It was the key to his new miserable life, and the symbol of his absolute surrender. That very night, with barely 2 suitcases of clothes, Julian and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne left their palace in a taxi. The car took them to a gritty neighborhood on the south side. The rental apartment was exactly as they had imagined. Small, with peeling paint on the walls and a single light bulb weakly illuminating the entrance. When Julian opened the door, the smell of dampness and stale air hit them head-on. This was their reality. From a golden throne they had fallen to the bottom of the abyss. Life in that cramped apartment was hell for Mrs. Eleanor Thorne. Her pride eroded day by day with the heat rising from the thin roof, with the noise of neighbors seeping through the flimsy walls, and with the bitter necessity of thinking twice even before eating. The money Victoria had left them vanished in the blink of an eye. Now they lived on Julian's small, irregular paycheck. Arrogance was no longer a luxury she could afford. The final blow to her pride came when, desperate, she tried to contact one of her so-called high society friends, the same woman who for years had flattered her with smiles and compliments. Using the last remaining balance on her phone, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne called and, with a pleading voice, tried to borrow money. The response was icy and humiliating. "Eleanor, I am sorry. My husband says we should not associate with people of questionable reputation. Besides, we are going on vacation to Aspen and we need a lot of money." The call ended. In that moment, Mrs. Eleanor Thorne collapsed. She finally understood that the social status she had worshipped for so long was as thin as paper. Without the money and luxury behind it, she was nothing to them, just an embarrassing rumor. Gathering the last scraps of strength and pride she had left, she did something she never would have imagined. She got on a crowded, overheated bus and went to Zenith Tower. She looked small, lost, ridiculous in the middle of that grand lobby. Her clothes, once considered expensive, now looked worn and ordinary. Miss Hopkins, Victoria's assistant, saw her from across the lobby with a look that was not mockery but quiet compassion. She escorted her, not to the president's office but to a small, simple conference room. A few minutes later, Victoria entered. This time she was not wearing a tailored suit. She had on a modest blouse and slacks. Her face was calm. There was no triumph in her eyes. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne could no longer hold herself together. She dropped to her knees and burst into tears. These were no longer the manipulative tears of a dramatic queen. They were the broken sobs of an elderly woman who had lost everything. "I am sorry, Victoria. I am sorry," she stammered through tears. "I was wrong. I was arrogant. I was cruel to you." Her voice cracked. I was jealous of you. Jealous of how incredible you were, while my son could do nothing. And so I blamed you for everything." She confessed it all. Her envy of Victoria's success, which she had secretly known about. The arrogance she used to cover her shame that her son lived off others. And above all, her gravest mistake, supporting Julian's affair because she wanted a daughter-in-law she could control. "Please, I beg you, Victoria. I'm not asking for the luxury back. I just cannot live like this. Punish me if you must, but please do not be so hard on Julian. Everything he did was because of my terrible upbringing." Victoria listened in silence. She did not help her stand. She let her mother-in-law empty all the poison of regret lodged in her chest. When the sobbing finally subsided, Victoria spoke. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Stand up, mother. Being on the floor changes nothing. Regret is worthless without change. This punishment is not meant to torture. It is meant to teach. What lesson have you learned?" Mrs. Eleanor Thorne looked at her with swollen, tear-filled eyes. For the first time she saw Victoria not as a daughter-in-law or a source of money, but as a woman far wiser and stronger than herself. While Mrs. Eleanor Thorne swallowed the bitter medicine of remorse, Julian was swallowing dust and sweat at a logistics company on the outskirts of the city. After being rejected by dozens of offices for having no work experience, the only job he managed to get was as a warehouse helper. The first day was hell. His body, accustomed to soft couches and air conditioning, had to haul heavy boxes under the heat of the warehouse roof. His muscles screamed. His soft palms were scraped raw, covered in blisters within the first hour. The warehouse foreman was a rough man who hurled insults whenever Julian moved too slowly. At lunchtime, Julian sat with the other workers on a piece of cardboard. He ate from a lunchbox with simple sides. He listened to them complain about motorcycle payments and their children's tutoring fees, real problems that sounded foreign to him. No one cared about his last name or what car he used to drive. His worth was measured by how many boxes he could move. Every night he returned to the rented apartment with his body in pieces. He fell asleep the moment he lay down without time to think too much. Slowly but surely hard work began to change him. His arrogance and laziness were worn down by sheer exhaustion. The first weekend, Julian received his pay, a few worn bills inside a brown envelope. It was not even enough to pay for a round of drinks at the cafe he used to visit with Bella. But when he looked at that money, something strange stirred inside him, something he had never felt before. Pride. That money was his. It was not a gift. Not an allowance. Not the result of living off someone else. It was the product of his own sweat. That night, for the first time, he handed his entire paycheck to his mother. "Mother, here is the money for this week's groceries," he said plainly. Then he went to his room and collapsed, his body aching. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne looked at the money in her hands and then at her son's back, now sturdier, heavier, more real. Tears welled in her eyes. Her son, her foolish prince, was finally beginning to learn how to be a man. 1 month after that tearful encounter with Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, Victoria decided it was time to close the final chapter of her past. She did not look for Julian in an office or at home. She went to the simple cafeteria where warehouse helpers ate lunch at midday. Julian was sitting alone in a corner, eating with appetite. He looked different. His skin was darker from the sun and heat. His body was more muscular. And his gaze was no longer empty. It held the focus of someone who works. He was not surprised when Victoria arrived and sat across from him. In contrast to the place, Victoria wore casual but elegant clothes. Yet there was no longer a cold or intimidating aura about her. Her face looked calmer, more at peace with herself. "How are you, Julian?" Victoria greeted him. Her voice was sincere without harshness. I am fine," Julian replied briefly, a little awkwardly. "What are you doing here?" Victoria went straight to the point. She placed a thick folder on the table between the still warm plates. "These are the documents, Julian. Read them, and if you agree, sign them." He already knew exactly what they were. He opened the folder and quickly reviewed the divorce papers. Victoria demanded nothing. The division of assets clearly stated that all assets in her name would remain her property and that Julian would receive not a single cent, something he had accepted long ago. There were no humiliating clauses or abusive conditions. Everything was clean, restrained, and strictly professional. "I am not going to make this difficult," Julian said hoarsely without lifting his eyes from the documents. "I will sign." "Thank you," Victoria replied. A brief silence followed. The constant murmur of the cafeteria filled the space between them. "Victoria," Julian said, finally daring to meet her eyes. "I am sorry for everything. I know it is too late and I do not expect your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I regret it." Victoria looked at him calmly and for the first time in a long while, saw the real Julian. Not the foolish prince. Not the unfaithful husband. Just a man who had made many mistakes and was now facing their consequences. "I have forgiven you, Julian," she said softly. "And I have also forgiven myself for abandoning myself for so long. Now we can both begin a new life." Julian signed the documents with the pen Victoria handed him. When he returned the folder, he felt as if a tremendous weight had lifted from his shoulders. It was a sad ending but also a liberating one. Their marriage, built on hypocrisy, officially ended in a modest cafeteria, on a table marked by the sweat of labor and a simple plate of food. Months passed and the lives of Julian and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne found a new rhythm, harsh and demanding. When the 3-month lease Victoria had funded ended, they had to start paying rent on their own. They moved to an even smaller apartment, farther from the city center. Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, with no profession, began taking orders for homemade cookies from neighbors. Her baking skill, once used only to impress at social gatherings, became her sole means of survival. Each morning she learned to bargain for vegetables at the traditional market and to count every cent carefully. She no longer complained. Her aged face was marked by fatigue but also by a new strength. Julian continued working at the warehouse. The pay was low but he was consistent and responsible. He no longer dreamed of sports cars or luxury watches. His ambitions were simple now: pay the rent on time and make sure his mother had money to buy ingredients for her cookies. The relationship between mother and son changed completely. Before they had been partners in comfort and arrogance. Now they were a team struggling to survive. Sometimes, when Julian came home from work and found Mrs. Eleanor Thorne asleep from exhaustion in front of the oven, he covered her with a blanket. A small but sincere gesture that would never have occurred to him before. They had lost everything: fortune, status, friendships, and family. It was an extremely costly life lesson. They were not happy, but they were no longer living a lie. In poverty and hard work, they were slowly reclaiming the fragments of dignity they had lost. Victoria did not give them a fish. She did not even give them a fishing rod. She simply threw them into the sea and forced them to learn how to swim. And surprisingly, they did. 1 year later, Victoria stood before the vast window of her new office in Hong Kong. Zenith Corp had achieved massive expansion in the Asian market. The contract she had just signed was worth billions of dollars. She allowed herself a faint smile. It was not the cold, calculating smile of before, but a serene one, filled with genuine satisfaction and peace. After the divorce, from time to time she received news of Julian and Mrs. Eleanor Thorne through Ms. Hopkins, who monitored them from a distance under her instructions. Knowing they could survive on their own, Victoria finally released the past. She no longer lived in the shadow of revenge. Her energy was devoted entirely to building her empire, and above all to building her own happiness. She began dedicating more time to herself. She learned to paint. She traveled alone. She formed sincere friendships. Her phone vibrated. It was a video call from Rachel. "Congratulations, Miss Sterling," Rachel exclaimed from the screen. "I saw the news about the contract on television. It is incredible." Victoria laughed. "Thank you, Rachel. It is all thanks to your support. So when are you coming back? We have to celebrate soon." Victoria lifted her gaze toward the bright horizon of the city. "Very soon." After hanging up, she stood watching the endless lights below her feet. She used to believe her fortune was a golden cage she had built for herself to live inside a farce. She had made herself small on purpose to protect other people's egos. Now she understood the truth. The cage had never existed. The door had always been open. She had simply been afraid to fly. Betrayal and pain were the storm that shattered that illusion. And her revenge was the path that taught her how to use her wings. She no longer needed a cage. She no longer needed to dim her light for anyone. She was Victoria Sterling. Not someone's wife. Not someone's daughter-in-law. She was the absolute owner of her own destiny. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Let us know in the comments which moment touched you the most. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our new stories. And before you go, watch the story we've left here on the screen. We're sure it will make you think and touch your heart as well.